Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome to the, I can't believe I'm saying this, 50th episode of the Human Risk podcast. To celebrate that milestone, I've got an episode for you that has a little bit of a party feel about it. Before I introduce my guest this time, let me thank all of you for listening to the show and allowing me into your ears and hopefully your minds. I've got lots more episodes to come, many of which have already been recorded, and some great guests booked beyond that. But anyway, back to this 50th episode, and my guest this time has what I think is one of the most fun jobs ever. Professor Charles Spence is head of the Crossmodal Research Laboratory at Oxford University. He's interested in how people perceive the world around them, in particular how our brains manage to process the information from each of our different senses to form the extraordinarily rich multisensory experiences that fill our daily lives. His research focuses on how a better understanding of the human mind will lead to a better design of foods, products, interfaces and environments in the future. I came across Charles because of a piece of research he'd written about wine. There's a link to that in the show notes. I was so intrigued by what it had to say that I wanted him on the show. We talked about that and the other research that Charles is doing. It is fascinating stuff. You might be wondering what this has to do with human risk. And the answer is perception. What Charles specialises in is how we perceive things, which is also the basis on which we make decisions. If we want to influence human decision making and mitigate human risk, then understanding how and why we perceive things is important. I wanted to make sure that I also picked Charles's brain on how we can try new sensory experiences ourselves. So stand by at the end for some tips on things you can do at home to make your lockdown that little bit more fun. Please enjoy, ideally with a glass of wine in your hand, my conversation with Professor Charles Spence. So Charles, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Hi there.
I think this is going to be one of the most fun recordings I've done because the topic is really excites me and interests me. And I think is a very uplifting one given the current environment. Before we dive into the topic of wine, can you just give my listeners a little bit of a sense of your area of specialism and what you research?
So I'm a psychologist by training, based at Oxford University the last quarter of a century or so, I guess. Interested in the senses and working at kind of the interface of basic and applied science around the science of the senses, trying to take the latest insights from how we see and hear and smell and taste and feel the world around us and how the brain kind of combines those different senses and use that knowledge to kind of aid in the design of better real-world experiences. And we work a lot, the lab's been funded a lot by car industry, paints, fragrances, food and beverage industry. And in all cases, just trying to, by understanding the mind, I guess, of the consumer, design better to stimulate the senses, be it through sort of sensory marketing at one end, through sort of nudging type interventions further down the line, or at the other end, depending on how you view things.
The amazing thing here is that what you're really looking at is changing people's perceptions of something and therefore giving them a different experience, encouraging them to change their behavior without actually changing the underlying reality. And so it's almost a sort of form of alchemy in some respects, in terms of the sort of stuff you're looking at, which is I have a view on something and you're looking to change that view or influence that view to get me potentially to behave differently.
That's right. We have got Ferran Adrià, formerly the world's top chef, on record saying this is magic.
Right.
But yes, because given that I and those in the lab here in Oxford are neither chemists nor designers nor engineers, we can't sort of make anything, and hence we're really just looking at how things that have been made can be perceived differently. And as you say, mostly that's been in the moment as you're deciding which bottle of wine to buy or which meal to order from the menu. But starting also then to think a bit about how our experiences kind of evolve and live over time. So the memory of the meal that you've had or the bottle of wine is becoming increasingly important, and how, maybe in a way, our sort of memory of experiences in many cases kind of outlives the actual consumption experience. and hence thinking about whether you can use the same rules to kind of bias perception or bias memory as we have done to bias perception by, given that we're sort of sensory scientists, that tends to be all around what we can do by eye in terms of color or the sound of things, the weight of things, the smell of things that don't normally smell, through sort of naming and labeling and other kind of what some might call tricks or magic to make things perceived differently in a way that I guess is sort of surprising, and probably mostly we don't realize. And in fact, I guess that's kind of the challenge for us currently is I used to sort of think that it was enough just to do the research, get a significant result and publish it in some obscure journal or other to kind of convince people to change their behavior, or about the factors that affect our choice and our decisions. And they sort of realize that in fact that's often not the case, and that very often, I guess to all of us, it feels like when we taste a glass of wine, we can really taste the wine in the glass, and we're not influenced by the weight of the bottle, the weight of the glass, the shape of the label, the music in the background, the color of the light bulbs, the shape of the table you're sitting at, or the sound of the cork that you did not hear before that glass was poured. And we all feel like we can just taste the wine and that we would not be influenced by any of these other sensory factors, any kind of extrinsic background, unattended things. And yet we are. And our job currently and our challenge is to try and convince people of that, and then think about how you can use those insights from one domain, which may be wine, and apply them to any other kind of domain that one might be interested in.
When you started to talk about the research, there's obviously you could perceive this and say this is about manipulating people and persuading them to do things they don't want. But of course, it's not a neutral game where you're suddenly coming on the pitch with some new ideas. We are influenced by these things, whether we know it or not already. And so what you're doing is changing things that are already there, as opposed to bringing, here's suddenly some new influence that's there. It's an existing condition that we're already influenced by our environment and those other pieces.
And I think for us is, so I mean, the question that very often crops up when I give talks then is, isn't this just manipulation in the marketplace? And in a way, that's a compliment, because it implies people are taking the science seriously enough to be worried. Whereas for the last 10, 20 years, I've been going around telling people, if you change the color of your plate, you can make your food taste sweeter. Did you know if you play a bit of Mozart, you can bring out the fruity notes in your wine? And people would just kind of laugh you off and say, don't be stupid. I know what wine tastes like. You wouldn't get me that easily. So it's a real change in mindset for people to start saying, okay, this is scary or potentially scary, that if it's true that you can do these things. But you're right. When it comes to any of our, say, food or beverage experiences, we always drink from a receptacle. We never drink out of nothing. There's always a glass, a can, a bottle, a cup, a mug. And I think for too long, people are focused kind of on the chemical composition of the thing itself. And no one's thinking about how, say, a drink gets to our mouth, except maybe in the world of wine. But when it comes to coffee, whatever it is, 1.5 billion cups of coffee drunk every day or year. And no one has studied the coffee cup, the science of the coffee cup, how its shape, its color, its texture, its weight matter. And the same thing for food. We do a lot of work with sort of Michelin-starred chefs and food companies. And again, people have spent so long thinking about the formulation of the food, and no one has ever done a study of the cutlery that we always use to eat with. Wow. It's right there. It's fundamental to all of our eating and drinking, the cup, the glass, the plate, and yet it just hasn't been studied. It's there in the background, and we're trying to shine attention on that. And so in that sense, the cup, the plate, the cutlery has always been there, and intuitively, or occasionally through some sort of clever marketers have picked up on some of these elements and have used them, but maybe not often knowing why they work, nor necessarily thinking about how they operate in the brain. And hence, if you know that, maybe it gives you the opportunity to extend from one category, like a bottle of wine, to ice cream, to tea, to I don't know, car design, if you have to understand some of the underlying principles, perhaps.
It always fascinates me because we know this intuitively. If we want to get kids to eat something, there's a game to be played around use of color. So we all intuitively understand this now. And then somewhere in the process of becoming adults, and of course one can question whether one ever gets to that stage. It's sort of just, there isn't the stage where you suddenly are announced as one. We seem to lose that. And I find that really interesting, that we know intuitively that we can persuade children to do it. So why is that Why does that sort of seem distant from us from adulthood?
Yeah, I think it's just because it kind of goes against our intuitions and how it feels to us. So the example I always kind of use is, on the one hand, we all hold we can really taste the wine, the food, and that we would be influenced. We can cut out all of these extraneous product extrinsic factors, if you will. And yet at the same time, we've all had the experience, well, at least of those who have reached adulthood, of kind of the Provençal rosé paradox of going on holiday to the Mediterranean and having that rosé wine that tastes so wonderful that you're tempted to buy a bottle or a case to bring back home. So good, only to open it on a cold winter's night with your family and a few holiday snaps and find it's not the same wine. What's changed between those two occasions? And in fact, the wine's the same, but maybe your mood, your emotion, all these other factors are there influencing us. And so that resonates. Everyone's got a version of the Provençal rosé paradox. And so we simultaneously hold these kind of contradictory views that, no, I would not be influenced by this other stuff. And yet, yeah, I know what you're talking about with the Provençal rosé. It happened to me. And it's all going on in our heads. And so then the challenge is how to make people aware, to convince them of the influence of these other factors so that they will then incorporate it into their own practice, whatever that might be.
And the paper that grabbed my attention, any research involving wine is always going to grab my attention, but was a sort of fascinating collation of all the things that we know so far about how that operates. And you mention in that wine is sort of one of the most, I'll get the wording wrong, but one of the most closely studied, closely observed pieces. And I was intrigued, firstly, why that was, and secondly, what inspired you to dive into the subject of wine as opposed to, I don't know, coffee or anything else.
Mm-hmm. So the lab in Oxford, has been funded mostly by industry since I started it back in the 90s. And for a long time, that's been funded by sort of Unilevers of this world. And we're working on fruit teas and brain-enhancing margarines, ice creams that tickle parts of your brain you didn't know you had, so on and so forth. Unilever, not a company known for its wine portfolio, because it doesn't have one. And whenever we're thinking about how to design better, tastier fruit teas or more delicious ice creams, you sort of look in the literature and say, okay, what's been done before? Have people looked at the name of the ice cream, the shape of the tub in which it comes, the typeface you use, so on and so forth. And maybe some people had done some stuff, but it always turned out there was 10 times as much research on whatever question you were interested in the world of wine. Be it, the influence of the cup or the glass. Again, there may be 20 or 30 published studies in wine, 0 in coffee until we started a couple of years ago, 0 in tea, 0 in beer, more or less. If you think about naming, it's far more in wine. Think about the impact of colour, then wine's research is far, far greater. And even one of our pet interests, kind of the impact of music, sort of sonic seasoning, changing the taste of music by playing particular bits of music. Again, that's been evolved for longer in the world of wine than elsewhere. So why is that the case? It's kind of strange at one level. I suspect, it's kind of curious too, in that probably wine is one of the hardest materials or things to study because it changes so much year on year. Bottle variation, you name it. It's just a much harder thing to get your sort of hands on and to study correctly and to be able to repeat. Whereas, cola is the same today, tomorrow, wherever you buy it. There's no change. You've got your stimulus fixed. In the world of wine, it's forever changing. For that reason, it's very hard to study. So you'd think, why not go for something easy instead? And yet maybe it's also... is it something about the huge variety, whether it's, a million different wine bottles you could buy, probably at any point somewhere on a shelf around the world? Is it partly around the kind of the culture that has evolved around wine appreciation that is more widespread these days than is the case perhaps for coffee or for beer? Maybe that's part of it too. Or maybe just what kind of got me interested was, there's 10 times more about wine. So even if you're not interested in wine, you need to know what's being done in wine to know about what to do about baked beans or fruit tea or whatever else. And then I could read some of these early studies from the 1980s, when I guess the wine environment was very different in the UK probably than it is today. And you'd have these researchers saying, yes, well, we'd be a bunch of us together, and then we ordered a case of Bordeaux, cracked them open, poured them in red glasses, blue glasses, had a sip. We kind of drank the rest of it, and that didn't sound like such a bad to be working in.
But it's interesting, actually, as you were talking, I was sort of thinking, because my initial conclusion had been that it is worth experimenting on something that has a high enough margin. Mm-hmm. And therefore it's expensive enough to warrant doing these sorts of things. But then I sort of concluded that ought to then also apply to spirits. Mm-hmm. So, and then actually it was your comment just now around the volatility of the supply and the different changes that made me think maybe actually there is a point here that you need, if you want people to keep coming back to your thing, if you're offering them something that's changing relatively substantially, you need to start thinking about how that's presented and present some consistencies and play with some of those other dynamics in a way that if you got a gin still, produce a relatively consistent product over time, as opposed to vines which don't.
Mm-hmm. And as well, I suppose part of the evolution has also been in the marketplace that when one looks at spirits, yes, you have choice, but a manageable choice. You can probably count on for any particular spirit on a couple of hands or a couple of pairs of hands, the number of alternatives you're given. Contrast that with the world of wine, where that's, I think, one of the most complex and ever-changing shelves in the supermarket, at least for branded products. And hence, when there is so much competition, that I think has also driven the marketers, the packaging and label designers to new heights in order to capture attention in a way that they can do much more easily in a less competed and stable market. Through just taking a unique color or bottle shape or something like that instead. So that's definitely there being part of it. And maybe it is coming now. I think the same sort of research in the world of spirits, but you're right, it has happened later. And then one might even think, well, is there a difference? Would you expect more research to be done in the world of, gins and vodkas than whiskies? Is there a hierarchy of innovativeness or need to sort of take over the total experience? Because in a way, you might think vodka should be the one, given that by definition it's kind of tasteless.
Right.
If you can make people pay 4 times as much for a thing by definition can't taste, nor taste the difference between, that ought to be the case where the total experience really is more important than just the product itself. You need to build in all the knobs and the whistles to try and turn this drink of vodka into something that is greater than just what comes out of the bottle through experiential design and marketing and the like.
And if we look at the history of wine, one of the things that I had always presumed, and this is clearly based around the odd tour that I may or may not have done to cellars and wineries and so on and so forth, where there's a lot of explanation around, for example, the champagne bottle. Mm-hmm. And the fact, there's some history behind it. And long time ago, as these monks who seem to be heavily involved in the world of alcohol, so thanks to them for their diligence in many centuries ago, they tested various things out and so the narrative I'd always picked up was there's always a sort of logistical reason why bottles are shaped the way they are or certain colours. Is your sense, I realize it's a very general question, but is your sense that there's as much around sensory manipulation or influence as there is around logistics, or is it largely logistics driven and the sensory pieces come later on?
It's kind of hard to know, I guess, ultimately. One certainly does come across a whole range of creation myths, be it in wine or in champagne bottles. Maybe that's where, then those bottles become heavier. And to the extent that champagne has been more expensive wine, then is that where the heavy bottle quality wine association comes from initially? Through my sort of own favourites, I look a lot at the design of symbols on labels, and very fond of sort of stars and triangles and angular shapes that you see a lot on beer and sparkling waters that you see in the front of Heineken. And if you go back and say, well, what's that doing there? Then in 1820, Heineken won a prize for a good tasting beer, and somehow that shape stuck. If you look at San Pellegrino, kind of carbonated water, it's had stars on its label since 1890 when the brand first started. No one explains what they're doing there, why there are 7 of them on the label, which aren't on their Stillwater brand Aqua Panna. So it sort of feels like maybe, in some cases, it might be intuitive design. In other cases, it might just be sort of survival of the fittest in the marketplace, some sort of kind of evolutionary design practice that those design choices, that did resonate because they kind of made sense that angularity on a label indicates fizziness and bitterness, which you get in sparkling water or beer, say. That weight seems to convey notions of quality that enhances the olfactory component. Those are design decisions that work. They maybe stay in the marketplace because they give rise to a more successful or enjoyable or worthwhile product experience. And so maybe there's no, kind of intelligent creator. It just happens. And that those brands that got it wrong, that started trying to put their wine in very light bottles, they're just not around anymore. Those wines that try to stand out on the shelf, like the white wine producers who came out with a white wine called Red or wine Blue, they'll be gone before before too long, and hence they're not there for hindsight. So it looks like clever, intelligent design all along, but maybe it's just survival of the fittest, I think.
We've seen innovation in terms of naming. We've seen people try slightly different things. And yet over time, and I presume that this must be the case, this is just my sort of observation, is that we tend to revert back. So there's the odd one that sort of succeeds, but ballpark, we know that the colours of bottles don't seem to change that much. There's variations on a theme, but ballpark it seems to sit in the same piece. Is there limits on the innovation piece that we can see, or do you just think it's a matter of time and that somebody will be able to break out and push those boundaries?
Well, I suppose we did a lot of kind of work on packaging design. Again, the thing that products come in that's kind of so boring, why would anybody study it? But to us, it's kind of the most exciting bit of the products very often is the packaging and the stories they tell, consciously or otherwise, subliminally to our brain, be it around the shapes, be it around the weight, be it around the texture, and so on. And I suppose one of our classic examples then again is back to the world of wine. Is the wine bottle is probably one of the worst designed bits of packaging ever.
Right.
12%, cork taint on all those expensive old wines from the college cellar. It's a dreadful rate, and anywhere else that packaging format would have gone long, long ago. And yet it succeeds, and yet it stays with us. And the sort of the simplest study is just serve the same wine we've done it from screw top bottles versus what you think is a cork stopper bottle. And the wine tastes different to you. Do the same experiment with the wine served in a back-in box versus bottle, and it's a whole different tasting experience. So while we kind of recognise that the traditional format of the wine bottle with cork is a very poor solution for lots of reasons, for cork taint on the one hand, for maybe recycling, lots of questions about transporting all that glass around the world. Yet at the same time, it is such a powerful image mould that is maybe one of the best examples where the packaging is part of the product experience, and you cannot pull these things apart. And hence that will limit, even though technically now there are more alternative solutions. Square bottles that, plastic bottles that will fit through your letterbox in the era of COVID and lockdown, but they don't have quite the right sensory characteristics. And hence I think that's going to be the major limitation to
conceptually, the sort of bag in a box wine makes perfect sense, right? So and therefore, if one were creating a new drink, you could kind of start with that. But as you say, it doesn't seem to have taken off, and these attempts at innovation, they're sort of sneered at, and so there's all sorts of interesting things, which is not only is it our perception, but there's a whole social piece as well, and what other people will think of us. If we are seen to be purchasing or consuming in that way.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that works at various levels, but that decision about which wine to buy, given that the wines keep changing and there are so many choices to be had, is a very risky decision that we won't know whether we got it right or wrong till we get it home, and it's too late. Mostly,
can't take it back.
Yeah. So how then do you signal to the majority of consumers who maybe aren't that discerning, or have been told that they are not, that they're making a good choice, or that those who are buying the wine are choosing for, the wine in box, kind of a gift scenario. How will they know I've spent lots of money on the wine I'm bringing to the dinner party? Well, buy a bottle in a box. That's not going to change the taste of the wine at all. But it signifies something maybe more premium. And so there's a lot of that going on, sort of signalling. And then for the actual consumption experience, a lot of my time I spend going around companies and say, why on earth are you evaluating your products away from packaging in a red lighted booth with sensory experts by themselves. This is so unlike real-world consumption experiences. And I can give you example after example of how our product experience is changed by the packaging in which it's presented. It makes no sense, but change the color of the can, change the weight of the bottle, change the texture of, or the noise of your crisp packet, and the contents will be rated differently. And whatever we think about the packaging, consciously or otherwise, then seems to kind of transfer and carry over to our experience of what's inside. So if the packaging, the bottle is a heavy bottle, and in one of our fun studies, we went to the Oxford wine store and then, fun but boring, a strange experiment for a psychologist to do together with Bettina Picaris-Fissman. We went into the Oxford Wine Company and over 2 days weighed every single bottle from bottom left to top right of their capacious stock, noted the price, the region of origin, the grape variety, so on and so forth. And what came out from that was a nice clear correlation of 8 grams of glass is what you get for every extra pound sterling you paid for a bottle of wine. Maybe better tasting wine as well, but what you definitely get for your money is extra weight in the hand. And to the extent that something feels heavier, in most product categories, that seems to automatically, implicitly go with higher quality, and hence we use that, and what we feel then about the weight of the bottle carries over to what we think about the contents. Sounds, and most people and most companies don't really believe it, and you have to get over that, disbelief and unbelief that the packaging can have such a profound impact in order to say, okay, if we are going to innovate in the packaging, how are we going to do it? Because just simply lightweighting, well, that might work from an environmental perspective, but it is seriously downgrading people's quality perception of the contents because of the loss of weight. So how can we trick the mind into making it seem like it's heavy, even if it's not? Or what else can we do to signal quality if certain options or traditional routes are no longer available to us?
And it's fascinating that the heuristic that we use to select the bottle, or the heuristics plural that we use to select the bottle, is so disconnected from the raw material. On the basis of what you've just described, it's fact that there's lots of examples where you can sort of understand the evolutionary basis on which we might choose to make a decision. Now, it might not work well in the modern world, but there's a logic. This seems to be completely detached from anything that one might describe as sort of evolutionarily sensible.
Yeah. Though those evolutionary psychologists can always come up with something.
Right.
I've yet to see them be sort of speechless. So, for one thing you might think of is, so we've done studies with in the Milan Design School where we take hand washing liquid and give it to people in different bottles that are heavier or lighter, and the same hand washing liquid in a heavy bottle smells more intense. So you get more, and most people associate the smelliness of their hand washing solution with its efficaciousness, and hence the weight then does sort of carry over to deliver a relevant benefit. Makes no sense that it should, but this is how the brain seems to put these things together, and hence maybe you do get many examples, and when you go out and buy all manner of things that, if more intense, a richer flavor, a stronger odor is better, as it normally is, then by putting it in a heavier bottle, you get that experience more often. And we just sort of pick up these, I think our underlying is we just sort of pick up these statistical associations in the environment. That's what our brain does. Just pick up regularities and internalizes them. And many of those regularities are kind of useful. Like the little dog I can hear yapping next door because it's got a high-pitched yap. I know it's not going to bite my leg off. Whereas I think twice about.
Right.
That's a useful correlation between size and pitch that I picked up and internalized. And other ones, like in some of our work on the sonic seasoning, when we get music to change the taste of wine or other foods, there we find that high-pitched sounds bring out sweetness and low-pitched sounds will bring out the bitterness of a drink or food. Where does that come from? What environmental regularity we've picked up there? And our evolutionary just so story is if you take a newborn at birth and put a sweet taste on their tongue, the tongue will go out and up to kind of lick, to ingest the goodness, the calories for growth. Put a bitter taste on a newborn's tongue. You will understand that my brother's never let me anywhere near his
right, I was going to say,
presence. But I'm led to believe the tongue will go out and down. You try to eject the bitter tasting food. Blah! And if you think about the sorts of sounds babies make with their tongue out and down, or with your tongue up. So this pitch-taste association is there in nature. Humans do it, chimpanzees do it, rats do it. It's completely useless to know it, but I can't tell the difference between these correlations that are useful and useless, and a lot of our work is sort of playing on the useless ones, because the useful ones have probably been picked up by somebody already. They're the obvious ones, maybe. That red fruits are riper and sweeter than green fruits that are sourer, less energy dense, less worth climbing a tree for. That sort of more generally known statistic, and the world is full of these correlations, useful and useless.
That's fascinating. And the one I have to ask you about is the glasses, the difference the glass makes. And I will confess to having been on a Riedel tasting evening where it was sort of, very, very showman-like presentation, and we got some glasses to take away. And it genuinely, from my perspective, tasted different. But I'm intrigued to know whether I was legged over, and if there's anything in that at all, or if the whole charade of different glasses, does it make any difference whatsoever, or is this all about image and kind of messing with my senses?
Yes and no. Yes, but not for the reasons you thought. They tell you. I think we're very interested in glassware and cups and beakers, and because no one's studying them, but they're always there. They always affect the experience. And wine is a case where there have been probably 30 to 40 published studies since 1960, 1970 or so. And if you put all those studies together, what you see is that Riedel has tried very hard, it would appear, to be able to demonstrate in peer-reviewed scientific research their glasses make a wine taste better. But what the research shows is if you do not know, if you're blinded to the glass you're tasting from, so that I blindfold you and I agitate a glass under your nose with a machine, and we have machines for just that job, or I let the wine breathe in one glass, a very expensive wine glass, or a cheap college wine glass, and pour those two wines into two neutral glasses and say, okay, which wine has breathed better, as it were, in the glass. In both of these cases, when you do not know which glass you're drinking from, the glass makes no difference at all. So one conclusion, it's not worth spending $100 or pounds on a very fancy wine glass, because research says it makes no difference. And yet that is not how we ever do drink wine. We never drink it blindfolded with somebody else putting it to our lips, or not very often. So we always are aware of the weight of the glass, the feel, the balance. And in those cases where people are aware of the glass, suddenly it makes a huge difference. So the fact that the glass does or doesn't make a difference depending on whether you know about the glass suggests to me that it's all a matter of psychology. It's all in your head. It's about belief, knowledge, associations, priming. It's not about physicochemical changes in volatile release above the surface of the liquid in the glass. It's not about different flow properties of the wine across your tongue. Those things do give rise to a detectable change, say in the chemical condition over the headspace of a glass, of a wine in a glass. There is a measurable difference, measurable by machine, just not measurable by human nose or palate, as far as we can tell. So in that sense, I do have, as a present, some Riedel glasses at home. I do have students, Janice Wang, who was a former head of the university blind wine tasting team of Oxford University, also doing a PhD on music, changing the taste of wine. And she went on one of these courses and was also sort of convinced, but probably by the point in the evening when they say, okay, make water taste different to you, then you ought to know where the source of the convincing effect really.
Right. Yeah. No, you're absolutely correct. It was more compelling as the evening went on. So I hadn't made that link, but now that you've pointed out, helpful. So does that mean, I'll take it to a slightly facetious point, does that mean I should buy expensive glasses and cheap wine?
As long as you put it in a heavy bottle, yeah. So I sort of come at this. I'm not a wine expert. I drink a fair amount over the years. So I've probably drunk some nice wine, but I'm sort of mystified by the apparent abilities in the blind wine tasting, such as they are, and collect all the research showing how poor even the experts are under properly monitored and measured blind tasting conditions. So for me, it's kind of an interesting. Maybe that's why I come at it from thinking about the glass, the bottle, rather than from the grapes. I say to my students, maybe I have no taste buds. That's why I'm so excited about everything else, about the music and the lighting, because I just can't taste the thing. And that it's probably not quite true, but I think it would explain a lot of sort of interest that these other things matter. And as well, when people say, "Oh, I'm coming to your house for dinner. What am I going to bring as wine? You do all this research on why it's so difficult." Then I just say, "But as long as it's in a heavy bottle."
Right.
Sorry. One of my favourite examples, my brother used to be something in the city, and they used to have a very healthy wine budget, picking up very fancy bottles and then going on holidays skiing in Switzerland. He'd taken some with him, but in the hotel room only had the plastic bathroom cups. So maybe not the fanciest of hotels, come to think of it, but anyway. And these are the last 2 bottles of a case of very fancy wine that he's looked for, he's craved, he's nurtured, he's enjoyed over the years. He knows exactly what this wine should and does taste like, and yet served out of those plastic cups. It's lost. He just couldn't, even when you know what it does taste like, what it can taste like, the glass is such a powerful thing, and hence, yes, expensive glasses are definitely part of the experience worth paying for. Just a shame they break so often.
Right, no, exactly. Well, I was almost hoping you were going to go the other way and say, absolutely don't spend any money. That makes no difference whatsoever. And therefore I could avoid that disaster. Just go to IKEA and stock up on things I can break and not worry too much about. But yeah, and they're a pain in the neck to wash as well. It's just got danger written all over it, which I think is built into the business model of, we know you're going to need to buy more of these because you're going to break them. Right, yeah. And I mean, there's an interesting thing around wine as well, with the sort of the ceremony that goes with, if you go to a restaurant and you've got the glasses are there already as a sort of suggestive thing that you will be having wine. And then you have the wine list, which is a separate, it's not the wine menu, it's the wine list, and it's a separate document that's there. And then you have to speak to somebody who is knowledgeable. And even if you know something about wine, there's pressure on you to speak. I mean, it's highly manipulative. As a sort of concept, thereby illustrating the thought that seems to have gone into this mystique.
Absolutely right. So maybe there again, as the world now, or until recently, there were so many brands of mustard out there that in New York there were mustard sommeliers to help.
Right.
Too much money and not enough sense to navigate the mustard aisle. I'm sure I've seen the same for water sommeliers as well now. So maybe when they're looking at how to practice their art, then seeing how some of the best of the wine experts do it is, and talking to a number of them about what they do, and then it is more sort of social psychology than maybe anything else. Trying to read the customer, second guessing.
We're sort of reading the customer's wallet as much as anything else, from what I can tell.
But one of those things that's hard to, because there's not so much kind of proper experimentation done on it. One of those real world situations that is important, that where we are influenced or helped, but which is maybe hard to study.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Because I presume restaurants aren't desperately keen to have you sort of snooping around that part of the process. So you're having to look at the. Or maybe they are.
Just look at the research and I point them to all. The research showing, if you play classical music, people spend more in the wine shop, the restaurant. If you play French music, they buy more French wine. This from work from Adrian North in Nature in 1997. So if you're in a hotel restaurant and you're trying to up your sales of French wine, French classical music's the way to go. When you see the evidence. Surely you wouldn't let the sommelier or the duty manager put their iPod on. This is too important a decision to be left to chance, and yet they do.
Right.
They just sort of one. You see so many sort of brand managers and store managers. I'll say, well, here's the evidence. It's not just my evidence; it's lots of people's evidence, all showing just how much music influences our choices, not just what the wine waiter says. I think, well, either once you've heard that, either do things differently or stop paying me to come and see you. But it's a very strange kind of dissociation there where, sort of frustrates me in a way, because I say, here's the evidence, you should do something about it. And now I get to the point with some of my clients saying either tell me what's wrong with the evidence, or change your behaviour. But don't keep asking me back to tell you the same thing when you're not going to. And why aren't they implementing? Well, I guess it comes back to this thing. It doesn't feel like that to any of us. It doesn't feel like to any of us like music in the supermarket biases our choice. None of us think we're that stupid or manipulable. Yet all the evidence says this is happening again and again. And that can be used then to bias our wine choices, which maybe is neither here nor there. But I'm sort of very interested in using it to bias our food choices. And maybe nudging us towards healthier selections in supermarkets. There are a lot of opportunities potentially to use the science, which has been worked out best in wine and perhaps in food and drink generally, and then apply it to these other sort of harder to study situations.
I mean, it's fascinating when you were sort of talking, because you're coming with your wall of evidence. Mm-hmm. And what's strange is when one reflects on things we've been talking about before around the sort of there is clearly a lot of things, a lot of thought goes into these pieces. So they're prepared to engage up to a level on mm-hmm. some of these psychological pieces. But it's almost like sort of we'll go as far as we've gone before, but we won't make further leaps because that feels dangerous. And yet you're already in the space of psychologically influencing people because through some of the other pieces some of the other sort of stunts that you pull in, and you sort of stop. And it's interesting actually hearing you say that, because there are so many other examples of things that I get involved with where you sort of say, look, you are already attempting to influence their decision making. Why not try, why not go a little bit further and push it and don't limit yourself by dint of what is perceived wisdom or what you see everybody else doing? Because actually, if you want to succeed, you need to do things nobody else is doing, mm-hmm. which with hindsight and history will be viewed as the norm, as tends to happen. But there seems to be this fear of pushing it too far.
Yeah, and maybe I see it most in sort of the clothing store sectors where it sort of hit me the hardest. And now sort of been researching into this, looking at work on sensory marketing, neuromarketing, behavioral economics, and so on and so forth, and then seeing maybe in these sort of marketing store owner settings, if your job is on the line, people tend to go with gut feel.
Right. And
if the evidence lines up with gut feel, perfect. I'll go with the evidence. But when it doesn't, then it sort of feels like people are risk averse, and they can justify spending more money on lighting, just like everyone of their predecessors has done, and the cost more than anything else. But if they were to add fragrance in the store and it didn't increase sales, even though the evidence said it should, then it's their job, their neck, and that's sort of harder to justify doing something different. And so, yeah, it's both harder to do the experiments, but harder to get those involved to actually engage and take the chance. Much easier to do it in the world of food and drink, or with a crazy chef or barista or cocktail maker or wine brand. Prove it there. But my kind of belief is, well, whatever is true, whatever I can make you think differently about a bottle of wine, I can stick the car in the wine's place, a new jacket, any other item can probably be manipulated in much the same way. It's just we've got there faster, we've learned more through studying these sort of easy purchases or easy decisions like wine, and in terms of trying to convince the decision makers, the budget holders, to design differently, then I sort of realized they have to experience this. They can't read about it. I can show them as many graphs with as many significant asterisks as you like, but if it goes against their gut feel, nothing will change. But if I can get them into an experience where, wow, that same wine completely tasted differently in this room versus that room, if they experience it themselves, then my hope, I'm not sure I have enough evidence to fully support it, but my hope is that they will have to be convinced, and they will change they'll be more engaged in more risky choices or innovative design decisions.
And that's really interesting that you talk about wine as a sort of test case, for want of a better phrase, where that's your sort of gateway drug, if you like, to get people to think differently about other things. And I'm really intrigued. I'd never really thought about it as a sort of flagship, if you like, for experimentation. But it sounds as if that's a useful way of articulating that to people.
And then one might worry, well, maybe wine's unlike other products, perhaps, or maybe it isn't. And also maybe in our research, again, I sort of have the feeling from our things that we do that it can be easier to demonstrate the impact of an intervention if the underlying judgment you're less sure of, and hence if I want to change how you perceive Coca-Cola, maybe that's going to be hard because it's just like a unitary, simple taste, never changes. Whereas if I give you a glass of wine, and there are whatever 1 million bottles you could buy, or that I could have poured for you, and that they do evolve in the bottle, in the glass, in the carafe or wherever else, then you're a lot less certain of what you're actually judging. So you don't have those kind of firm handles of prior experience to rest on and say, oh, this is Coke. I know what Coke tastes like, therefore it tastes like Coke. No, if it's a glass of wine, well, I've had lots of glasses of wine, and some evolve, some don't, some are more like this, like that, and hence if you're less certain of what it is that you're tasting, the glass, right, label, the weight, the name, the wine waiter, everything else can perhaps have a bigger impact.
That's amazing. Where's the next sort of frontier in terms of wine?
So we're doing a lot on, in part now we're sort of actually, one line of things is going from, okay, we've done it all with wine, what about coffee and tea? These and beer, these are probably the 3 most consumed beverages on the planet. And lo and behold, no one studied the coffee cup ever, or the tea cup. So there's lots of fun to be had there. And we're currently working with baristas and coffee makers and so on the shape, weight, texture, material of coffee cups, tea cups, beer glasses, you name it. So that's taking the insights out from wine elsewhere. And specifically in wine, we are doing a lot on touch and texture, so changing taste through rubbing bits of sandpaper and silk, which is a very kind of futurist thing.
Wow.
We are doing a bit on, the response I sometimes have got from MWs, masters of wine here and there, is, why would you bother paying this music to improve the taste of the wine? We can just buy a more expensive wine to begin with. I don't really and maybe they've got a slight truth. I mean, we've got enough evidence now to make wine 15% sweeter or fruitier or fresher or more tannic or older. But we're kind of just tweaking an experience to a new experience that you could have probably bought anyway. So there's nothing out of the ordinary, nothing extraordinary there. And what we're trying to do now more is go for the extraordinary. Knowing what we know, can we take people in a new direction? And this for us is both to answer the masters of wine, but also to show what the science can potentially do, and also comes out of, in fact, wine events and work we've done with chefs like Heston Blumenthal, where people in some of these multisensory experiences are brought to tears. So there are many people who've been to the Fat Duck in Bray restaurant and had the sound of the sea dish that we worked on the innovation for 15 years ago now. The seafood comes to the table, you get an MP3 player and a conch shell, you hear about it, you hear the waves and the seagulls overhead, and many, many people just cry. I think seafood would never made me cry, but this dish somehow does. The same thing happens in, we've been working with Campo Viejo wines a few years, and in 1 year had like one of the Campo Viejo Color Lab, where a synesthetic artist made some sonic seasoning, some music to match each of 3 of their wines. And again, the journalists who went, one of them at least, brought to tears. This is an extraordinary response to fish or to wine. Why does it happen? And how can we play with that? Can we induce it more often? And that's sort of fun for me because it's kind of at the extremes of what a psychologist can do, because you have ethics panels, this, that, and the other. And if my ex cry, I'm in a big load of trouble. So, what have we done? How dare you? Get a spanking from the head of department. Whereas artists can sort of play in that space much better. So it's kind of like a borderline thing where the science can take you so far, but it needs to be done together with the artists to create something. And the other way we've tried it is with been working with Glenmorangie Whiskey and with some French video artists. And then we worked with this thing that's called ASMR, or Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, which is like an electric neck shiver some people get when you whisper and when you crinkle paper and you whisper. Very bizarre, but maybe up to a third of people have this ASMR response. It's kind of pleasurable. And there are lots of ASMRers online who watch content before they go to bed. Many brands are interested now in leveraging ASMR. We work with Glenn Morangi to create ASMR content that people could watch at home while having a glass of the whiskey, with just the right sounds to trigger this kind of electric neck shiver, and so deliver an extraordinary response around the whiskey that you've never ever had from a glass of whiskey before. This is another example. So these are just two of the ways that we think, well, where could we go with this to deliver extraordinary experiences, be it tears, be it a feeling of awe, be it ASMR, neck shiver, or we're also working with magicians to try and deliver magical food experiences. What are they? Could they exist? Why don't they exist? Or why haven't they existed so far? Again, that's sort of the borders of what's possible with food experience.
Two things occurred to me. One is I had assumed that the Hester Blumenthal's of this world did their thing in their own labs. I hadn't made a link that they would sort of stretch out to academia, which I think is fascinating. He's always sort of portrayed as the sort of the mad scientist on his own, but I wasn't at all aware there was a connection to sort of traditional academia in that space.
Yeah, no, he's since was working with him on and off since about 2003 actually, and even then he was coming to Oxford to see other scientists. And we'd just sort of wander around science labs, physiology, psychology labs, food chemistry labs, and see what was going on. Not necessarily understanding it, because he's not a scientist by training, but some ideas would kind of click. And that's led into the design of all manner of dishes. And I see many other innovative work a lot with London chef Joseph Youssef currently. He's in the sort of same mould of looking for inspiration, not in a cookery book, not in a food science course, but by talking to surgeons, by talking to wallpaper designers, by talking to all sorts of strange and wonderful people, and maybe some insights there from one discipline will be transposable into the kitchen, onto the restaurant table to deliver tomorrow's amazing dishes. There's that kind of cross-pollination, fertilization, but done sort of spontaneously, not because we're told that's what we should be doing, just when it sort of has worked there with Heston, so he's been coming a lot, and we go down there quite a lot, and that was got me into food, because we're at first doing the fruit teas and why do they smell great, look great, but taste disappointing. Answer because they don't have any sugar in them was a thing, and doing these brain enhancing margarines, and working with the food companies, and we'd take the science, and then the chefs in the food companies would come back at innovation days with these dreadful new prototype products that would fall all over your chin, and you say, yeah, I can sort of see the science is in there, but no one's going to want that. Right. with a chef like Heston, who you might tell, here's our latest finding, like the Sonic chip, when he came in 2003, we can make chips taste crunchier, fresher, more enjoyable by boosting the sound. That then led into the sound of the seafood dish, where the same idea was sort of taken, but in a very much more creative, innovative way. And that's where, for us, working with the artists, designers, chefs, baristas, mixologists, perfume makers is so great, because they can take the best of the science and turn it into something that people want to talk about, learn about, and maybe experience, and by experiencing, then incorporate into their own decision-making and behavior in a way that they never would if I just kept publishing in dry academic science journals.
Wow. I mean, I'm just, you're making me smile here. One, I want a glass of wine, absolutely, and some amazing food. That's easily resolvable. But what a fantastic job, fantastic career that are sort of, very, I think this is the sort of thing where you could point to kids and go, look what you could be if you just have some imagination. And so what a fabulous slot you've ended up in. I can tell just from the way you talk about it that you're absolutely passionate about it, which is right. But the two final questions for you. One of which I was just intrigued by. You talked about sort of eliciting positive sensations. Mm-hmm. And it sort of occurred to me that there are plenty of challenges we have in the modern world. If I think of things like mental health, PTSD, where presumably there is potentially a place for food and some of the things you're looking at and sensations to help look at those issues as well.
Yes, I should think so. What have we seen in that sort of space? Well, clearly, the environment in which we find ourselves, whether we're eating or drinking or just, in our day job or recovering from some stressful incident, what things smell like, the sounds we hear, all of the sensory cues are there in the background influencing us. So there's sort of a line in there. I also see a number of sort of food artists who now have been sort of working with displaced or populations who find themselves in hostile territory. So, thinking she was working with some gypsies in Hungary, and then using food as a vehicle to bring people together, to have these gypsies actually hidden behind a screen so you couldn't see who was feeding you. But after somebody has a very intimate act, then you find out as they're telling you their story and about how they are displaced and prejudiced against. Suddenly, that's a very intimate thing. I see it a lot in we're doing work on gastro diplomacy. So there's growing interest in food's role in decision making, in all sorts of corporate deal making, in political domain. That's part of it's on the table literally, but it also can be to bring people together, to separate them, to bias their decisions, and specifically in PTSD and mental health. I haven't seen so much yet, but
no, look, you give me more than enough. I mean, I'm the idea of gastro diplomacy. I'd always viewed it as French Prime Minister comes to the UK and is served British something or other, and vice versa as a sort of, and it's almost a sort of aggressive thing about you're here and you will eat my food and I will, and particularly the Anglo-French relationship. But it's interesting that that is part of that game, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, and you see it a lot of just how often it's neglected, not thought about. So my wife's Colombian, and we had a big peace process there over the recent years with the FARC guerrillas and the sort of drugs trade. And you sort of seen the final negotiations of this 50-year sort of battle has been going on. The Colombian Prime Minister, the head of the FARC guerrillas, there on this stage, and the wind's blowing, and the curtains are running away. And there's no food, and it's just no one's had that kind of almost chef-like view of this of designing this experience. This is just an experience like any other experience, like a glass of wine, like a meal in the restaurant. Having this negotiation, it's an experience. And if I know the lighting matters in the restaurant, I know the lighting matters here. If I know the background noise matters here, it matters there. The smells, if I know people bond over food, if I see it in the workplace, be it in all the whatever the Silicon Valley companies who would sort of feed their staff for free, be it in the Oxbridge colleges that again feed their staff for free, kind of. We get paid a bit less than the Silicon Valley, but still, food's being used there, and again probably intuitively. But can we understand the principles behind it, how the senses play in? Get over the fact that just because we're not aware of these things doesn't mean they don't influence us. Study how they do influence us in easy to study situations like the world of wine, and then say, okay, no, we've seen that there. How can we take that insight and use it for diplomacy, for nudging people towards more sustainable food choices? We're doing a lot in hospital setting now with children who in anti-cancer hospital in Spain, where the children just don't want to eat, and if they don't eat, they don't recover as quickly, so they're in there longer. And again, there's a lot of sensory design that can be done. But going in there straight to try and improve the situation for those kids, again, it's very hard to get traction, and the studies take years to get the approval of the hospitals, the parents, the kids, the doctors, you name it, the ethics boards. But if you can go in there having done something simpler, quicker, with a chef or with a bottle of wine, then you're in a much better place, I think, to try and design the right study and hopefully change behaviour.
Wow.
In case for the better.
That hugely inspirational. And final question is for my listeners, and as I say, I'll put links to all of your research and writings in the show notes. But if you had to give them an advice to sort of improve their sensory experience of food or drink, what would be your sort of top tip or tips?
So it's got to be heavy is the one that I sort of love. Heavy cutlery makes your dinner taste better. Heavy bottle of wine. Heavy glass. This is the simplest way to make things taste better and higher quality. And then probably the other one, I could tell you to paint your walls Baker Miller pink, like bubblegum pink, but probably none of your listeners would even if I could show them the evidence. But instead, think about the music that's in the background, because that is perhaps the simplest aspect of our environment to change. Maybe it has a bigger impact than any others, both the kind of type of music, the speed, the loudness, It can make things taste sweeter, make you drink more, slower, less, make things appear more expensive. Very simple thing to play with. And so why not just try experimenting yourself? Don't take my word for it. But it's always a way, what's been done before with a different group of people and a different product. You should just take the evidence and run with it and say, okay, see for myself. And have some.
Fantastic. And we have barely mentioned the coronavirus, which makes this an exceptional episode of the podcast, because I think we all need a break from that. And wow, what a break from that was. Thank you so much. That's been supremely inspirational. You've put a massive smile on my face. I now have to go and have a glass of wine. But thank you so much for your time. It's been hugely pleasurable.
Yeah, pleasure.
So that's it for the 50th, can't believe I'm saying it, episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Charles for appearing and to you for listening. I highly recommend you try out some of the things he suggested. It really does make a difference. If you're new to the Human Risk Podcast, you'll find it wherever you get your quality audio content. If you've been a listener for some time, or even if you are a new listener and you wanted to leave a review for the show, that would be much appreciated. It helps keep the profile of it high, which allows other people to find it and allows me to continue to attract the kind of high-quality guests I've managed thus far. I'll be releasing more episodes of this show very, very soon. In the meantime, do check out the Human Risk YouTube channel and the Human Risk newsletter. Details of both of those are in the show notes. Above all, please stay safe, and I'll see you very soon for another episode of the Human Risk Podcast.